Chapter 16 of The Man with the Red Beard by David Whitelaw. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne. Chapter 16. The Rat. As I threaded my way through the streets to the little hotel at which I had taken a room, the package which might mean so much to me seemed to burn a hole in my breast. I knew well the danger I ran. But what wonders a pair of grey eyes, or a pair of brown eyes, or a pair of blue eyes for that matter, will work in a man. I laughed a little to myself as I thought what risk I was taking. Suppose the police decided to search me. I was a new arrival in the city, and as such was, of course, under a certain suspicion. I could see the gleam of satisfaction that would pass over the official faces as they looked through the papers, and the sneers when I was unable to tell them even the full address where Mr. Erickson, fur merchant, of Birmingham lived. I knew absolutely nothing of the man whose name was on my passport. In fact, I did not even know if the fellow existed. Berriman had not told me where he obtained the paper, and I had not thought to ask him. I carried with me perhaps enough evidence to hang a dozen men, myself included, but there might be among the letters a clue that I could follow up to reach the girl I loved, and that was all that mattered. Berriman had begged me to make my home with him during the time I should stay in Moscow, but I did not consider it fair that I should do so. I am afraid he thought me a hare-brained fool to return to the fire which had burnt me so badly. He told me that the next time I could not expect to have the luck to escape, and I knew that his advice was sound. He had recommended me to a hotel near the outer boulevards. It was an unpretentious affair, situated over a café, but it was eminently respectable, and much used by English commercial travellers. As far as was possible in Russia, the Hotel Saratov was passed over by the authorities as hardly the place to harbor dangerous revolutionaries. Here I knew that I would be in comparative safety, and it was to the Saratov that I went with my precious packet of papers. I did not, in case I should be followed, evince any hurry. In fact, I sat for quite a while in the café, choosing a table which was visible from the street. I picked up an English paper, I think it was the Telegraph, but the censor's black blotches made it almost unrecognizable. From out of the corner of my eye I saw that a man passed and repassed, but this did not worry me unduly, knowing as I did that watch is kept on all new arrivals in Russia. If the man was watching me, he must have been convinced of my harmlessness, for I saw him no more after that evening. For perhaps an hour I sat and picked out little items of news from the paper, then, bidding the proprietor good night, took my candle and ascended the narrow dark stairs leading to my bedroom. I had purposely chosen a room on the third floor as being perhaps more private than those just above the café, for however innocent the Hotel Saratov might appear, it was in Russia, and a little caution is seldom wasted. I locked my door, and setting the candle on the little table, prepared to examine my packet. There was no chance, I told myself, of it being overlooked. I threw up the single window the room contained, and noticed with satisfaction that it was placed in a sheer wall, and that there was hardly ledge enough to give foothold to a sparrow. It was not late. A clock somewhere was striking 10, and to my right I could see the blur of radiance on the sky that told of the night life of a great city. Moscow had risen phoenix-like from the ashes of her troubles, and was once again her own gay self. I saw at the first glance as I spread the papers out before me that a majority of them were of no importance. These, together with those which were too soiled by their exposure to be decipherable, I placed on one side, gradually narrowing my material down to 3 documents. One, slight in itself, had for me a very weighty significance. It was but a scrap. I took it to be the leaf of some letter. Upon it were penciled a few words, and even these were only partly legible, the paper being very stained. I could make out, "Advise you strongly," "Absent yourself," "Great doings," then leave at, "Delay is," "Remember," "Not to blame," "If you remain," "Meet me," "Share." Not a great deal in itself, but it was the writing that seized upon me. Bergstov had shown me the letter he had received from Mariseff on the night of his fatal gathering. It had been an ordinary letter, not like the one which I had found a part of in the drainpipe. Bergstov's invitation had been an invitation to the flat, and I recognized at once that the handwriting was identical in both letters. I lit a cigarette and, crossing to the window, looked out over the city. I reconstructed the tragedy of the receipt of that letter. Evidently Felix Merizef was not alone in his schemes of treachery. There had been another, perhaps more than one, and he had neglected to take the warning his chief had sent him. Again, perhaps, he had hoped to make his mistake, and had been shot down by the police as they entered the building. The presence of the letter in the piping proved that his had been one of the bodies carried into the cul-de-sac, and that one traitor at least had met his deserts. I folded up the precious paper carefully between two letters. I said that my vengeance against Merizef did not require proof, but it was as well to have it. With these few words in his unmistakable handwriting, together with my knowledge of events, I had him in my power, to do with as I pleased when the time should come. I turned my attention to the other two papers. One was a soiled membership card of the order, dated 10 December, and made out in the name of one Simon Drafo, who, I read, had been received into the Geneva branch of the Brotherhood. This, I thought, might also be useful, and I placed it carefully away with the other papers. The third of which was merely a few names and addresses jotted on the back of an envelope. This latter I destroyed the next day, after committing its contents to memory. I did not hold it fair that I should in my efforts to save Myra incriminate others, and undo the work she had done in the snow-covered cul-de-sac. There were but 3 names, and I visited the addresses of them all, only to find that in 2 cases the rooms were empty, whilst the third had evidently changed its tenant. It seemed to me that I was wasting my time waiting about Moscow. I knew, also, that Russian soil was not the safest place for me, but somehow I was loath to leave the scenes among which I had met Myra, and among which, for all I knew, she might still be, perhaps in trouble. It did not follow because Berriman had not seen the girl since February that she had left Russia. I knew that to her the cause was everything. The more lost that the cause was, the stronger she would hold to it. Probably the raid had, for the moment, made it unsafe for her to remain in Moscow, but there were other places. What was to prevent her having gone to Kronstadt or Odessa or Petersburg to spread the propaganda in those cities? There was, I knew, always room for an enthusiast, such as was Myra Ramsay. It was while I was at this state of uncertainty that I met the Rat. He was sitting opposite to me in a café in the Red Square. I knew at once that I had seen him before. There was no mistaking the cadaverous cheeks, the hungry eyes, and the fair hair swept back in waves from his forehead, and falling in uneven lengths upon the collar of his coat. And then it came to me that it was at Merizef's flat that I had last seen him. He had accosted Bernard Bergstoff and myself as we had been talking to our host, given him greeting, and passed on. I had indeed been introduced to him in the moment he was with us, but his name I could not for the life of me recollect, except that like most prominent members of the revolutionary bands he had his nickname. That of the man on the other side of the little table I remembered had been the Rat. But it is not the usual thing to address a man who is to all intents a stranger by a nickname, more especially when that name is such a repellent one as that owned by my long-haired friend. I decided to shoot an arrow into the air. Taking a pencil from my pocket, I pushed aside my glass and commenced to scribble idly on the marble top of the table between us. Then my pencil, taking definite action, began the limning of what I hoped would attract the attention of the man opposite. There is a parlour game, I believe, in which the company, blindfolded, are invited to indicate the eye of a pig on a rough drawing of that animal, or to append the tail to a donkey. The next time that game is suggested in a gathering of which I am a member, I will ask someone to draw a rat upside down. It's absurdly difficult, but this was the task I had set myself, and I suppose because there is no other animal which could by any stretch of the imagination be confused with a rat, it was recognized. I noticed at first that the man took his eyes from his paper and glanced curiously at my handiwork, then at me. He let me go on, and I, having drawn my outline, began to shade in my rodent as convincingly as I could. He waited until I had finished, and then adjusting a pair of spectacles he bent down and scrutinized my work. "Monsieur is an artist?" The man was speaking in Russian, and I looked up and gave a little laugh, at the same time wetting my finger and smearing my drawing over the marble. It had served my purpose. He went on. "A curious subject, monsieur. A rat, is it not? Have we met before?" I leant across the table and gave him the password we had used when Felix Merizef gave his death party. Then I called to the waiter and had our glasses replenished. I could see that the rat was between two fires. A desire to fraternize with a brother and the fear inborn in all revolutionaries of spies. Over our drinks I put him more at ease. It was only when he asked my name that I cursed myself for not being prepared. I felt that the man was watching me narrowly. I gained a little time by lighting a cigarette and pretending to search my letter case for a card. Between the folds of a letter I caught sight of the little yellow membership card which I had found in my drainpipe. The man opposite me was waiting for his answer, and I had but one course to take. "Simon Draffo," I answered. It had come upon me suddenly that if I was to find any news of the girl I loved, I had better keep in with the clique to which she belonged. They alone could help me. Simon Draffo had, by his card, been initiated in Geneva, and the dates between that event and his presumed death had not given him much time in which to get known to his Russian fellows. There was a risk, but like the other risks it had to be taken. For all I knew, the man who was watching me from the other side of the table may have known the real Simon Draffo. The rat took the cigar from his lips. "Draffo," he said musingly, and put the cigar back again. "Yes, a new member, from Geneva," I said. "I'm an Anglo-Russian. I was taken that night. I've just escaped. I had a message for Bergstoff." The name of Bergstoff seemed to dispel any doubts the rat might have had as to my integrity. Also, knowing the man as I do now, the fact that I was well dressed may have had weight. The rat was evidently as poor as his namesake. "There are some questions I want to ask," I said. "There are certain members of the Brotherhood I want to trace. I'm anxious to—" The rat made a gesture of silence. "I think," he said, "that we would be better to come to my rooms. They are quite safe. I do not think I am suspected." He paused for a moment. Then, "Perhaps a bottle of vodka." I saw that he meant that I should pay for it, and I did so, also for what we had consumed at the table. He led me out by a door giving on to a side street, and to this day I do not know to what part of the city he took me. It was very dark and very dirty, and the rat's remark that it was quite safe came back to me. I could not imagine anyone, except in the most pressing business, penetrating the foul alleys we traversed that night. Great black buildings seemed to fall in on us as we threaded our way between them. Now and again I would catch a glimpse of the spangled sky. At last we stopped before a tumble-down wooden shanty, the door of which my guide opened by thrusting his finger through a little hole cut near the latch. I followed him up one short flight of stairs, broken and uneven, and waited while he scratched a match on the wall. The loathsome approach had prepared me for a scene of squalor, and I was agreeably surprised as the rat put the spluttering match to the lamp wick to find that my surroundings, although poor, were at least fairly clean. A table covered with a red cloth, a camp bedstead, and a sideboard together with 3 chairs comprised the furniture. 2 of these the latter man drew up to the table, on which he placed a couple of glasses he took from a shelf near the unlighted stove. He polished them with a corner of the tablecloth. "Bergstoff," he said to me. "He was a good man. And you, Monsieur Draffo, were a friend of Bergstoff?" I thought it necessary to drive home my credentials. "Yes," I replied. "I met him first in Paris, in the Boulevard Saint-Michel. You said he was a good man. Is he dead?" My companion was pouring the vodka into the glasses. "He was killed on that night, monsieur. Only a very few of us escaped death, or worse." I had no need to simulate the grief I felt at the news. In the short time Bernard and I had been together I had grown to like the man, to admire his high ideals, his love for liberty, his entire disregard of self. The rat took up one of the glasses and sighed. "You did not know his brother, monsieur?" he queried. "I met him once. Paul, was it not? I knew him but slightly. He, too, is dead. He was looked upon as a traitor, but I do not believe it. He was killed in London, Monsieur Draffo, by order of the Brotherhood." Here was news at last. If I was to learn more, I must proceed warily. "I heard something of that, I think," I said. "But was he not only wounded? I seem to have heard that he recovered." My host rose from his chair and took a square book from a cupboard I had not before noticed. He placed it on the table and thumbed over the pages. It contained, I saw, cuttings from newspapers, some in Russian, some in other languages. He stopped near the end and pointed out a few lines of print at the top of the page. I drew the book towards me and read. It was in Russian. There was no way of seeing from what paper it had been cut, and it recorded the simple fact that Paul Bergstoff, who had been sentenced to 3 years' penal servitude for the theft of the Azov diamond, had died in Dartmoor prison, no doubt, the cutting went on to say, from the effects of a wound received at an attempt to rescue him from the hands of the police. This information, as far as I was personally concerned, was far more important than that relating to his brother, but I did not intend that the rat should see this. Instead, I closed the book with a casual remark of sympathy. "A rescue," I said. The rat smiled. "So the fool papers said, but he was killed by the man who was sent to kill him. The Brotherhood never fail." "You mean Felix Marazeff?" I could see that the man was surprised at the extent of my knowledge. "It was in Geneva I heard that," I said, hoping that I had not shown too great an insight into the doings of the Brotherhood. "And what has become of this Marazeff? I met him but once, on that night. Was he, too, killed?" I waited with concealed impatience for the man's answer. When it came I saw that even now Marazeff was playing his double game unsuspected, still running with the hare and hunting with the hounds. "He is in London," the rat said, "where a few of us went after our disaster. I, too, have been in London, and in a week I return." For a moment or two I was silent, sitting at the table and turning over, casually, the pages of the book of cuttings. Casually, too, I put my next question. "Was there not a girl, Myra?" I asked, and toyed unconcernedly with my glass. The man across the table rubbed a grimy forefinger across the side of his nose. "Where Felix Marazeff is," he said, "Myra Ramsay will not be far off." "Then she is also in London?" "Yes. She remained there a month or two. She was not convicted as the others were, although she was taken prisoner. Some said that a friend at the court interceded for her. There was another man, a mad Englishman, who was taken, and Miss Ramsay seemed interested in him." "Then she waited here in Moscow, hoping to hear of this man?" I could barely repress the joy that would creep into my voice. "Marazeff, too, waited. I think he was jealous of the Englishman, and that he endeared himself to the girl by his actions at that time. He moved heaven and earth to obtain news. At last he did so. Mannering, that was the Englishman's name, died in the prison here in Moscow." I felt my face grow white with passion as I saw through the move of my enemy. Not content with sending me to a living tomb, he also, I would not trust myself to think. "And then?" I queried, and I was glad to notice that my voice did not show the state of my mind. "Then they went to England. They helped me to organize our little colony there. You are going to London, monsieur?" "Not for some little time," I said, for I was not anxious to have the rat as a traveling companion. I asked no more questions about Myra after this. We sat and spoke of other things, and all the time I was burning to get away from that little room and to stand under the stars and think. No longer had I a duty to consider. If I found Myra there was no need to give her to another. Paul Bergstoff was dead, and my quest could now be for myself. I suppose I had some feeling of sorrow for that poor man who had given all, even his life, but it is the fortune of war. As I walked to my hotel room that night, my heart sang within me. Myra had been anxious for me, had waited here in danger for my sake. Perhaps in that dark cul-de-sac the same knowledge had come to her as to me, that love was all that mattered. Suddenly I stopped in my stride. What if, thinking me dead, she had turned to the man who had worked to find me? It was a deep game that Felix Marazeff had played, but I would play a deeper, and it would be played on my native heath. Marazeff in London was hardly so formidable as Marazeff in Moscow. I had made an appointment, without thinking, to meet my new friend, the rat, at the café where I had encountered him the evening before. I hope he was not disappointed, for the train that left Moscow for the west the next morning had as one of its passengers a certain Harold Ericsson, fur merchant, of Birmingham. End of chapter 16.